Wow, wow, wow. I absolutely loved recording this episode with Dr. Katie Deming, who is known as the conscious oncologist. She also is starting back her podcast, Born to Heal. So you're going to want to check that out. We had a fantastic conversation about conscious medicine and what does that mean, and how Katie left conventional medicine after really from a process of knowing that it was time for her to do something a little bit differently, but then having a shared death experience with one of her patients. So she knew then that she really needed to shift things. So we have the conversation about that. And we also talk about structured water, which is really fun. I love to talk about water in our body and cellular hydration. So that's what we're doing here on this episode. I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed talking to Dr. Deming. Dr. Deming, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Kelly. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I can't wait to talk about what shifted you out of conventional medicine, because I think that that would be a great place to start. I want to hear about conscious medicine. I want to hear about water. You and I think, both are on the same page that we were born to heal. We are made to heal. So I think we'll have a lot to talk about. But if you would like, if that feels right to you to start with, you're at the top of your game. You are an oncologist that's kicking it, doing great in your career. What happened that you decided to leave conventional medicine?
Yeah. So it started about in 2019. I had this sense that something was wrong, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. All I could say was that I felt like I was supposed to be doing something else. And at the time, I was a radiation oncologist. I had been practicing for 20 years, or I guess at that time, probably like 18 years. And I was a healthcare leader running end-to-end care for a large organization, or had done that in like pieces, and felt like, I don't know why, but I feel like this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And obviously it makes no sense to, like, my spouse was like, what are you talking about? You spent your whole career or life training to do this. So I didn't finish my training until I was 32 years old. And so I trained for a really long time to become a radiation oncologist. He was, the things that he said to me were like, you're good at your job, your colleagues love you, your patients love you, you do meaningful work, you're helping people. Like, maybe something's wrong with you if you're not happy, that kind of thing. Like,
Right.
if you're not happy having all the things and making lots of money and, working 4 days a week, maybe it's you and you're never going to be happy. So for like a year now, we're now divorced. So like, obviously that was not, probably the most supportive thing, but for like a year I was like, okay, maybe something's wrong with me, and I was really trying to figure it out. Like, maybe I'm just not satisfied, but there was something, like, there was like a dis-ease inside of me around the way I was practicing, but I couldn't put a finger on it. And then what happened in 2020, like during the midst of the pandemic, I actually had been nominated to become the national medical director for one of the largest healthcare organizations in the United States, and would have been responsible for cancer care for 12 million Americans, like prevention and screening and all this stuff and treatment. And I went through that whole interview process, and I didn't really want the job. I was like, I don't know that I want to do this, but it was like, 4 months of interviews and all this stuff. It was a great experience, though, to like experience the highest level of the organization. And so I went through all of that. And then I didn't get it. It was between, like, there were 6 of us nominated, and then it came down to 2 of us, and a woman who's a researcher got it. And I was like, you know what? I'm so glad I didn't get it, because I'm like, I'm not meant to do this. And the CEO had called me after, and he said, your ideas are a little radical. Like, we loved your ideas, but it's like, I don't know that we're ready for it. The organization is ready to do the things that you wanted to do. And so I was like, okay, that happened for a reason. And then literally it was like within a couple of weeks, I had something called a shared death experience, which is like a near death experience, except for that the person who it happens to isn't the one who's dying. It can be like a healthcare provider at the scene, or an emergency personnel at the scene. And basically, that the person who's there can experience what the person who's crossing over experiences like the white light, the love, the magic of that experience that people who have near death experiences, the other person has. And I had one of those, and I didn't even know what that was. I had no idea that this was a thing. And it wasn't until after that then I've met other physicians who've had this experience and they speak about it. And that really shifted everything for me, because after that, I
Mhm.
was so clear. I was like, I don't care what anyone says. Like, I don't care what my husband says. Like, something is really wrong here. Like, and I can't tell you what it is, but I can tell you that I know it's not right. And that was like it. And also, the other thing is because I've been an oncologist for so long, and in my career, about 40% of my patients were palliatives. So I've been around death a lot. And I've also participated in medical aid in dying, which is helping people transition on their own terms if they have a terminal illness. And I had an experience in 2019 when I was helping one of my patients transition. And it was a beautiful transition. She was ready to go. She was 80 something, had esophageal cancer, and she just knew what she wanted. And it was such a beautiful experience to do that with her. But I remember leaving her home and saying, I'm leaving here alone. And that when I leave, whatever I'm accountable for in this lifetime, I'm going to be responsible myself. I can't point to anyone else. And I remember telling my husband this, like, we can't be peer pressured into living our lives the way anyone else wants us to live, because when we leave, we're going out alone and we're not going to have that other person to blame and to point it to. So I had that already. And then after this experience, knowing something was wrong, even though I didn't know the answer, I was so uncomfortable, but I was like, I got to leave. And I don't know what I'm going to do next, because I don't want to just jump into another specialty or, say, do something immediately, because I'm like, I need a little bit of time to figure out what is right, and I
Right.
still don't know exactly what's right, but I needed to get out. And so it took me a couple of years. So that was the fall of 2020. And, as a doctor, I gave
Mhm.
my practice a year's notice because they need to recruit in and, all of that stuff. So it took, and then also it resulted in a divorce, just because I knew my ex would not be supportive of that transition of me just leaving and not taking another job, and worked through all of that. But it took about 2 years. And
Mhm.
so July of 2022, I left. And then I took like almost a year and a half off to do my own healing and really start to get clear myself. And I know just from listening to the last episode that I listened to with Vanessa and you talking about quantum biology, I needed to start to do all the things to clear myself and to get myself clear, so that then I could, like, actually know truth when I saw it, and also help
Yeah,
other people. Because if we're not healed and whole ourselves, we can't give to other people what we don't have.
exactly.
So this is the work that I've been up to for the past year and a half. And then I just launched a practice that is, I think the closest thing people would describe it to is integrative oncology, but really a holistic approach to cancer and, chronic illness. It's, now that I have stepped outside the system, it's almost like, they say you can't read the label from inside the bottle. I like really couldn't read the label. I had no idea what I was actually part of until I could get outside and see. And a lot of what I have learned is that with cancer, there's all the other stuff, the emotional piece, the mental piece, the spiritual piece, being in alignment with yourself. All of these things make us sick. And it's not necessarily cancer is different from other chronic illnesses. It just manifests differently. Illness manifests differently in all of us because we're all unique individuals. And so the approach is similar, actually, whether you have cancer or another chronic illness.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm finding on the from a well, really from quantum biology perspective, right? From a quantum level, on a cellular level, where we manifest is can be unique, but the way that we get out of that is healing on a cellular level. So there's a lot that would look similar, doesn't really matter how it's manifested. The way out
Exactly.
is, yeah.
Yeah. And I think people get really focused or like, no, but I have breast. And I was like, my specialty was breast and gynecologic cancer. So People are like, but I have breast cancer and it's like very different. But the truth is that you just see that it's like, no, 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 we're just confused as a society because we've been taught that there's these diseases. But the truth is that all other types of healing don't bucket us into these disease types, like uh, you talking about homeopathy on the last
Mhm.
episode, or if
Mhm.
you look at Ayurveda, you look at other systems of healing, they look at constellation of symptoms rather than, diseases that we label in Western medicine. So,
Right. I'm having this very strange feel like I'm loving talking to you. But I'm like, I had the same thing in 2019 where I was feeling I was in academia. I loved my job. I loved my students. I had a paycheck. I was really getting awards for what I was doing. And I felt like I was being called to something else, but I didn't know what it was. And I was gonna stay, and then my university closed, so it was a really very clear the universe was like, "No, you're done," and then I tried again to go back into academia for a minute, and it was like, "No, I'm really done." Like, I could feel it that time. But you have to create these it doesn't make any sense, logical sense, but to create some space so that you can feel into it. So I love that your journey I'm like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, I totally get that kind of journey, and that doesn't make sense logically to a lot of people, but you have to follow your own heart." And I loved studying near-death experiences when I was probably 18 or 19 when I came across that information, probably 19. Yeah, 19. And I never really talked about it, didn't bring it into my work, just soldiered on through graduate school and on. But I've always just really loved what I hear from near death experiencers people. And so that experience alone would be just an incredible experience to have. And being present while people are transitioning, that sounds really powerful too. All of what you're saying is resonating with me. I'm thinking, what a cool I mean, I'm sure it was difficult, right? I'm sure that there were pieces where you must have thought, "What am I doing? Am I really gonna give up all of this security? I've worked so hard for this." So, was there a place that I mean, to me, we're in a conversation about trust. Trusting that you will be guided, and then if you take a step, the path will rise to meet you. But talk to me a little bit, is there anything that's kinda coming up for you about, "Oh, yeah," about trust and
well, the one thing I want to say in response to your first statement about, following your heart and it not making sense, like intuition doesn't make sense, right? It's not going to make sense because we're in a society where we've been conditioned, and also an educational system and medicine, all the systems
Yeah.
are designed, we've been conditioned to think something is right, but it's not necessarily right. So this is one thing that I've learned since, is that when your intuition is telling you something and you really feel it kind of deep, it most of the time doesn't make sense with what's going on. Because with what's going on is we're getting sick, right? We're being made sick by a system. And so I think that that's one piece to call out, that when people have these like really strong pullings inside, is like recognizing it's not supposed to make sense. And actually, there's a reason why you're having this, is because whatever you're in is not supporting you and is not doing what maybe you thought when you went into it. Like, of course, we all go into these fields. Like, of course, I went into being an oncologist because I wanted to help people, right? But then you get in there and you realize, oh, wow, this is like really maybe not the way to ultimately help people, like the root cause of what's going on. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say. And then
Mhm.
yes, I mean, I think that I'm extremely fortunate to have spent a lot of time around death, because, death is our greatest advisor. And that's actually what led me into medicine in the first place. Is I was a biopsychology and neuroscience major as an undergrad. And naively, I was thinking, oh, I could become a doctor, I become a neuroscience researcher. And I was looking at the two of those. And my mom had said, like, I don't know if you want to be a doctor. She was a nurse practitioner, and she just like was, at the time, she didn't have a ton of female doctors that she worked with. And she was like, I know you want to have a family, and I don't know, how that's going to be. So I was like, okay, well, what do I think would be the worst part about medicine? And I thought, I don't think that I could handle being around anyone who died, because I'd never had anyone in my family die or anyone close to us, except for a friend when I was in fourth grade. I had a friend die of leukemia, which was really hard. And I remember that I was like, I don't want to be around death. So I went and volunteered at hospice. This is kind of the way I approach my life, where I'm like, what's the hardest thing I could do? I'm just going to go do that. Because I was thinking like this would be the way I could cross medicine off my list. And as you can see, this obviously didn't turn out the way that I had intended. And what happened was I was 20 years old and I volunteered at hospice. And these people were strangers to me, but they shared wisdom that I had never heard from like leaders, family members, teachers. Like they were just sharing things with me, like if I could do it over again, if I could have more time, if I could, and they would just share these things, and it was all like different than the stuff that I had believed, and so I went into medicine, and specifically I went into medicine wanting to do cancer because of this experience at hospice, because there was such a intimacy connecting with people who were facing a life-threatening illness. And then also I was learning so much about life. And really that's like working in oncology has been like a lesson on life, because I really see what people say at the end of their life. And I think that's what's informed this decision, which I am not going to lie, was very hard. And especially like, I think if you have a partner who doesn't support you, it really like shakes your foundation. Like maybe something's wrong with me, but that shared death experience gave me enough conviction that I was like, I have to do it. I don't know why, but I have to. And so, but there, it was like, from the time I like put in my resignation, which was like the fall of 2021, until I actually left, it was horrible, because I was just having to manage myself, because it was like, but you don't know what you want to do. You don't know why it is that this isn't right. And the logic part of me, the logical part of me, and the part of me that has been so heavily educated and trained was like, this went against all of my conditioning,
Right. Right.
yeah,
So
yeah,
but to have faith or trust, I just think it's interesting that shared death experience gave you enough, whatever you needed to keep moving, to keep questioning, to stay curious there. It's just interesting. It's hitting me that the biggest places in my life where I felt that calling come up weren't necessarily because of people dying in my life. My dad had pancreatic cancer, and so it was a
mhm,
big shift for me. And then my best friend died with brain cancer when we were 44 years old. So these shifts, like being around death, hearing people talk about what they would do differently, I mean, that can make a big difference in our lives. So I'm like, oh yeah, that was going on for me, even though I wasn't around. It's just interesting. And I think, so you got out of the bottle and then could read the label, right? Because you couldn't read what is on the label? What what have you figured out is on
I
the
know.
label?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I really have taken from this whole experience is that I don't know what the truth is. And I don't know that we'll ever know in this lifetime, right? But what I know is what doesn't work and what keeps people sick. And, you know, since I've stepped out, I've really, looked at the history of Western medicine, and we haven't always done it this way, right? We've done it like this since the 30s, but before that, natural healing, homeopathy, all of these other ways of healing were basically medicine, right? And then you had this big shift, and then it was made like that's all bad, that's all quackery, and this whole new system developed up. And this is the thing is that this is part of what I knew was wrong in 2019. So it happened, I heard the parable in like 2017, I think, but it was starting to, the wheels were clicking for me. But I was at a meditation retreat in 2017, and there was this story that was told. It was the parable of the river. And the way that it goes is there's a river, there's a village along a river, And one day the villagers noticed a body that was floating down the river. And so they, ran out or, swam out and rescued this person and got them onto dry land. And then the next day there were two people drowning in the rivers. And so then they rescued them. And then there were four and then eight. And every day it's just like doubling. And the village gets very organized. They've got rescue boats. They've got this whole elaborate rescue system. They're really good at rescuing bodies off the river. They're like amazing at rescuing bodies off the river. And the village elders are praising them. You guys are doing such a good job. And I heard this and I was like, this is Western oncology. This is what we're doing. We are like glorified rescue workers on the river, pulling these people out. But what the heck is happening upstream? Like, what is happening up there? And I'm frustrated putting these people back on dry land and not knowing how they fell in the first place. And then watching them waltz off, do the same things. And we have such high recurrence rates for cancer that it did not. And so that is what I see, is that the system works exactly as it was designed. And it's designed to give medications to help with symptoms, but it doesn't heal the underlying cause of the problem. And our bodies are designed to show us symptoms so that we can heal the deeper issues. And so as a society, we've learned how to numb and, basically treat symptoms. And then, but we're not getting any better. And you can see it in the statistics. Like as a society, the obesity rate is just astronomical. And then, obesity, diabetes, neurodegenerative disease, they're all the same thing. They all have to do with our lifestyle of high stress, overdoing, eating too many carbs, and basically glycation, not getting enough sunlight, not grounding with it, or not being in, symbiosis or connection with our natural environment. And basic cancer is another part of that. So it's just, the system does exactly what it's designed, and it's a pharmaceutical system. That's Western medicine.
Right. Yeah, beautifully said. I so let's talk about conscious medicine and the work that you're doing now, what you mean by conscious medicine, because really its root, it's really helping people heal from a root perspective. But I also really want to talk about water because
Yeah.
I too believe that water is the connector that we, especially the water inside of us on our cellular hydration. So, what makes sense to go to next? What do you
Yeah.
feel like?
Well, so conscious oncologist is like, a lot of what illness is about is making the unconscious conscious,
Right.
finding those
Yeah.
things that people aren't aware are the problems that are creating the symptoms in their bodies. So, and it's a really a holistic approach, because one of the things about integrative medicine was interesting uh, when I left, and then I was looking at some different fellowship programs, because this is what we do. Like I've just been training my whole life. So like, why not get another certificate? And my mentor really cautioned me. He's like, okay, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but do you really want to be structured again? Do you want to get structured into something else? And when I started to look at the education for functional medicine and then also for integrative medicine, it was a little bit more of the same. And it was like teaching you, and then functional medicine really didn't appeal to me because I don't think it's that complicated. I really don't think we need to like run a gazillion tests on people. And I'm not saying that there's not a place for that, but it just wasn't for me. And I felt like it was more, we needed to kind of come back to ourselves. And integrative medicine, when I look through the curriculum, I'm like, okay, they're going to teach me superficial level about all these different kinds of alternative healings, but I'm not really going to be an expert at any of it. And basically they teach you enough that you can then refer to those providers. And then your practice could be whatever you want. Like you could be an integrative doctor and just do herbalism but I really saw that the one thing that when I left, I dove headfirst into what creates health in the body, because my whole education had been about disease, or like what we call disease in Western medicine, like
Yeah.
the pathology. And I wanted to understand, well, I know a lot about that, but I wanted to know, well, what actually makes us well? Like what contributes to a healthy organism? And as I dove into that, I realized that you have to have physical practices, which obviously is like what we eat, what we're doing, whether we're getting sun, whether we're grounding, all of those pieces. The emotion, you need emotional peace. You need the mental, like mind work, and then also spiritual. And when I say spiritual, what I mean about that is like, why are you here? And like, what is your purpose so that people can get aligned with who they really are? Because I actually think illness manifests when people are misaligned with their true self.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah, so conscious medicine for me
Yeah.
is really a balanced approach that encompasses all of that. And then water is actually the foundation or the science that explains it. And the interesting thing is I came about this, this is how like you said, the magic, the universe starts putting the puzzle pieces in front of you. And all I had to, once I let go, all I had to do was trust. And then the pieces have just been coming in, right? And they show up in the weirdest way. So
Mhm.
the whole water piece started for me because I'm dating someone who was a professional cyclist, and
Oh,
he
good.
was,
I'm very glad you're dating
yeah,
someone, by the way. I was like,
me
"You're just
too. It's
cute as a
very
button,
sweet.
and now that you're divorced, that's fabulous." Okay,
Thank
moving
you.
on to the water. Yeah.
Yes. So Steve was a professional cyclist. And when he was 50, he was still racing as a master, but he was racing, doing professional races. And he basically won state championship. This was like right after, around the time that he turned 50. He had won the state championship for Georgia for like the Pro 1-2 category, and then also over 35 and over 50. So basically was performing at a very high level. And he had some shortness, like a little bit of shortness of breath when he pushed himself past 100%. But who's not going to be short of breath when they push themselves at that level, right? But what happened was is that he had had an EKG before that race, because once a year his doctor had been monitoring his EKG because he had an arrhythmia.
Mhm.
And what happened was is that when he went in to go get an echocardiogram, they said, okay, well, your arrhythmia has kind of shifted, so let's just get an echocardiogram to make sure everything's okay. So he went and did this race, won, and looks like the picture of health, and walks into this cardiologist's office for an echocardiogram, and like the technician just turns completely ashen and walks out. The next thing he knows, he's like slammed into a defibrillating vest, and basically is told you're in heart failure, your ejection fraction is 15%. And for people who don't know what that means,
That's bad.
someone who is in heart failure with an ejection fraction of 15% usually can barely get out of bed and go to the bathroom. They probably couldn't make it to their mailbox. So when I heard this, he's now actually doing quite well. That was like a few years ago, and he's recovered quite a bit from his heart function. But this story from a Western medicine perspective made no sense to me, because I'm like, the heart is a pump. How could he have been performing like that and look the way that he does? Like, people who have heart failure, like their ankles are swollen, they've got fluid in their lungs, like all this stuff. So anyway, I came across Tom Cowan, Dr. Tom Cowan's
Mhm.
book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. And what it said on the front is the heart is not a pump. And I was like, oh my God, I got to read this, just because I'm like, this maybe explains why Steve was able to race with heart failure. And so in the book, what Tom Cowan talks about is that actually circulation is not driven by the pumping of the heart. It is actually driven by the structure of the water in our cells and in our blood. And basically, the idea is this. So Gerald Pollack is
We love
the
Gerald Pollack.
scientist. Oh, yes. Okay. So Gerald Pollack, actually, my podcast is relaunching on February 13th, and February 20th, Gerald Pollack's my first guest.
Oh, you
So I
lucky.
just,
I love him. What an amazing
yes.
guest to have on. Yes. So
Yeah,
we
so yeah, so basically, oh, so does your audience know about the structured water, or do you want me to just explain a
probably a
little so
little
that,
bit, but it
okay,
never hurts to just reiterate because it's,
okay,
mostly not sciencey people that it's just people trying to feel good. And so the structured water is really important. So I think just tell us again. It's
okay, perfect. So Gerald Pollack's work, basically, his most basic experiment that started to explain this was, you take a big beaker of water, and there was a tube, a glass tube. You can imagine like a test tube that's turned on its side horizontally in the water, and it's open on both sides. And what he found was that if you put a tube like that into just a bucket of water, the water will start to move in a specific direction through this tube without any energy, supposedly without any energy being applied. But basically, this water is moving. And then when they took the beaker of water and they put it in a lead box, the water would stop moving. And so basically what he discovered was that, and this builds on the work of Gilbert Ling,
Right.
who's another scientist. But basically what was going on is that our water is not just occur in like the liquid form or ice or steam. So we usually think there's three phases of water. The fourth phase that he describes, basically water starts to develop like he calls it an exclusion zone layer, but like a layer of organized water that has a different structure than the typical H2O, that
Mhm.
lines any hydrophilic surface. So like a glass tube in there is a surface that the water then structures up against. And when you have this easy layer of water developing, or structured water along the tube, it creates a charge differential. And that charge differential is actually fed by infrared, which we're surrounded by, right? That's why in the lead box it stops moving, but basically it's being fed by infrared, and that the water then starts moving because of this charge differential. And what Dr. Cowan describes in his book is that this is what's happening in our vessels.
Mhm.
The blood cells are lining the vessels and creating a charge differential. And this is what allows our blood to move through the system. And it kind of makes sense because, the blood goes from the heart to the arteries, then to the capillaries, and then to the veins and back. And if you think about it, the heart's the only place where you're pumping. The blood basically stops in the capillaries to like offload oxygen and or offload offload oxygen and take up CO2. And but it's like, how does it get going again? And
Right.
so this explained that. So I was like, oh my gosh, it was just like a mind bender for me because it was so backwards of what I had been taught. And then the other thing he explains is that the heart is really vortexing,
Yes.
the blood rather than truly serving as a pump. So after I read that book, then I found that he had a book on cancer, which is really funny that I came as an oncologist, I came to his, work through the heart, and then, but it's like the signs of just following the signs.
Right.
And
Right.
so then I read his book, Cancer and the New Biology of Water. And this is a really powerful book. And what he talks about there is he does talk about the structure of water in terms of circulation, but he talked about it in terms of the water that we hold in our body.
Yeah.
And the structuring of the water is not just important in the water that you drink, although that's important. It's actually the structuring of the water in the cells. And he would actually argue maybe there aren't cells, and I don't know the answer to that question.
Right.
He's really pushing us to think differently. But
Right.
basically what he said is
True.
the water that we're holding in our tissues, whether we call that cellular water or not, basically is meant to be structured. And that if you have the water structured properly, this is what creates optimal health.
Right.
And the nutrients that create the structuring of the water are dependent on the mitochondria,
Right.
which everything we know, like now everyone's talking about mitochondria. It's very clear that mitochondrial health is very important in the function of our bodies and our
Mhm.
cells. And basically what he was describing is that the mitochondria are responsible for structuring the water in our cells through ATP. Like most people think of ATP just as an energy source, but he explained that ATP creates a conformational change in the structure of the proteins in the water that
Mhm.
restructures the water. And when you have this proper structuring, then you have nice, healthy, in the book, he calls them nice, healthy cells. Now I think he would say something different, but basically the idea is that when the cells lose this structuring of the water, either due to dysfunctional mitochondria, which could be from hereditary, could be from the lifestyle that we're living, could be from not getting the right nutrients, could be from not going in the sun, not grounding, all the things, right?
Right.
But basically, if you don't have this proper structuring, that then the cells start to lose their charge. And actually, this is one of the things that Dr. Pollack talks about, is that cancer cells,
Mhm.
like most normal cells, have are negatively charged and cancer cells are less negatively charged. So they're more of positive charge, although they're both negative, but less negatively charged. So
Hmm.
you start to lose that charge. And then you also start to almost have like kind of a dehydration of the cells. And this is like cancer. So your listeners probably haven't felt tumors, but I felt lots and lots of tumors and they're all hard. And like, so this stuff, this made sense to me where I was like, oh, okay. And that the idea is that the goal is not just to kill these cells, because these cells, and also the other thing that happens is that you have a shift from using oxidative phosphorylation,
Yeah.
which is the normal, respiration or desirable method of using fuel and respiration in our cells, to using anaerobic glycolysis. And
Right.
cancer, by definition, uses anaerobic glycolysis. And so basically, those cells have to use so much more. They can only use sugar, they only use glucose, and then they have to use so much more sugar to create even 1/9 of the amount of ATP. And so basically, you have cells that are starving for sugar and they're pulling it from everywhere, which is what we see. If you get a PET scan for cancer, what we're doing is we're injecting a radio labeled sugar so that the cancer shows up bright, because
Lights
all of
up.
the
Mm.
exactly.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
basically, this all fit with me. And then it started to like make sense where I was like, okay, now I understand, because I was like, now the physical part made sense, because now I'm like, now I understand why we have to ground. Now I understand why we need sunlight, because it's all tied to the mitochondria to
Mhm.
structure the water. And then it also made sense from an emotional standpoint, because emotions affect the water that we hold in ourselves. And this ties back to Dr. Emoto's work,
Yes.
which basically, for your listeners who are not familiar with this work, basically they would say loving things to water, and they would crystallize, like do water crystallography, and look at the water under the microscope, and they would see that the water would be in these beautiful crystalline formations of like snowflakes that are beautiful and structured. And then they would say hateful things to the water and it would be
Mhm.
completely disorganized. And so I knew the emotional piece was really important in health, but now the science of the water helped me understand why. I'm like, oh, the water has memory,
That's
and our
right.
water is affected by all of our emotions. So that was the emotional piece. And then the mental piece is, I don't know if you're familiar with, or if you've ever talked about Veda Austin's
Oh,
work.
love Veda. Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
so Veda
Yeah.
Austin's work is incredible, but so she shows how water has consciousness
Right.
and that and memory, and it, she's a visual artist, so you can see the consciousness in the water that is recording everything around us. And this made sense from the mental standpoint.
Right.
So, and then I think from a consciousness standpoint, the way that I look at this is that if you start to get your water right, which is basically all the things that you talk about with quantum biology, it's all the same, it's
It's
all
all the
coming
same.
together.
Right, but it's
If you get it
right.
right, you start to get clearer, your antenna is clearer, and you're not as like, uh, you know, full of toxins, that
Junked
you can
up, right.
actually
Yeah.
start to connect up
Yes.
and connect with higher consciousness. And that's one of the things I will say from my shared death experience, now that I understand the science of it a little bit, is from David Hawkins' work. So David
Mhm.
Hawkins was a medical doctor who worked in consciousness, but he described that people who have near-death experiences, basically they get tuned and they can tap into higher level conscious information. And that's really what's happened to me since that, is that I can connect up. But what I've realized through understanding the water and then everything else that I was learning and bringing it all together is that we can teach people how to create a lifestyle that facilitates this so that then they can connect to higher levels of information.
Right, exactly. And that's the really exciting part because it's not hard. I mean, it's simple. It's challenging to get yourself to do these things, but the practice is actually quite simple. It's about being in harmony with your natural environment. Some of these things are not that difficult. But I also it's really shifted the way I think about symptoms. So, and the way we teach mental health and the way we teach, I'm sure in medicine too, but it's really I was a part of that system. I helped educate everyone, and it's not bad, it's not necessarily even wrong, it's just not the full picture. And when you come to understand mitochondria, it all starts clicking. And the more you clean your brain and clean your body, the more you're right, it's an antenna. We already are an antenna. So we're already tuning to the information. So if you give yourself the right inputs, you're going to be attuning to the right information that's just going to keep propelling you to that higher consciousness. But I've started thinking about symptoms as maybe consciousness, like coming to speak you into the next. I don't know if that even makes sense, but that's
Yeah.
what it feels like to me. It's that we have the wrong idea of symptoms. I always thought of that as communication, but it seems like it's even beyond communication.
No, it's like a knocking at the door, right? It's like, knock, knock. Are
No.
you hello? Anyone there? Anyone there? Something's going on. It is like it is. Symptoms are like your higher self, your, whatever we want to call it, bringing your attention to something that is not right on a deeper level.
Right.
So, and then, when you were saying it's not difficult, I would say it's simple.
Right.
It's not easy to do it in the world that we live.
That's true.
So
That's
I think recognizing that, because that is one of the things that for me has been really challenging. And especially I have children who go back and forth between two houses, which is really hard when you know the right things, but then it's just like this back and forth. And
Mhm.
and also so many things that I was taught to think are not important. So it's rewiring. And then also like I have to be like careful about being too hard on myself and being like, I have to do it's like, no, no, no. Okay. I'm gonna get this. So like I did this piece and I'm gonna make sure I'm doing that. And then I'm gonna add things and adding it over time and knowing you don't have to do everything right now, but
Mhm.
find something that is meaningful that you can do and build that habit. And then we can add on to it. It's progress over perfection. So I think it's important to recognize, though, it is not easy in the environment that we live in and the
That's
society
true.
that we live in.
That's true, that's why I corrected myself. I was like,
Yeah.
"Simple, not easy," because it isn't that easy, but once you get going and you're right, if you can the biggest piece for me, I see all the time people beating up on themselves for not getting it faster or moving faster. First of all, you get it when you get it. You're moving at the right pace for you, and slow and steady wins the race here. Like, slow and steady is absolutely fine. And if you're beating up on yourself, we just talked about structured water and emotion and how the water inside of us holds memory. So if you're beating up on yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, the way you're treating yourself, that's all contributing to the whole picture, but in a much bigger way than I think we would any of us ever would have imagined.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like
Yeah.
we're probably our biggest enemy
Yeah, I know.
in terms of the
Yeah.
things that we say to ourselves. And I think also just recognizing this is kind of the nature of the human brain and not also then to get hard on yourself for being hard on yourself. That's one of the things that I used to talk about before I knew any of this, before I even left radiation oncology. I used to say to my patients, please don't beat up on yourself for beating you like that like you're not doing it enough. So then your heart, it's like this like vicious circle where it just gets so out of control. It's like, okay, well, one of the ways that the practical ways that I teach clients to do this is really to treat themselves like they would a child or someone that they love. Like, when you start saying these things to yourself, ask if your best friend was going through this, would you say these things? And the answer is like, absolutely not. Right.
Yeah.
But this is, and it all affects us. Everything that we do affects how we're holding the water in ourselves and ultimately, what we're and I think this is one of the things too is that is I think about it is like we're a body of water
Mhm.
and we're either nourishing
Mhm.
or we're detoxifying. And it's a balance
Mhm.
between the two. And so
Oh,
we don't have to be perfect because we can
yeah.
detoxify. And in all these different areas, like water's a detoxifying agent. We can use water, we can use fasting, there are all these different ways. So it's like, let's just take diet, for example. It's like okay, the goal is to like eat well, like 80 to 90% of the time. And then when you're going to have a piece of cake, enjoy it.
Mhm.
And then we do things to help us detoxify and fast or whatever it is. So it's just like, I think it's all a balance. And I think just in general, balance is so important of like
Mhm.
holding it all, right? We are designed to have both the, you know, I don't want to say good and bad, but these different
Mhm.
opposing forces were intended to carry them. And it's just finding a balance and allowing things to flow through you and not having to be so rigid. I think the rigidity comes from the structuring and conditioning that we've had.
Right. I would agree with that. So is there anything that we haven't talked about that you really wanted to talk about, or anything that's really nourishing your body, mind, soul right now that you wanted to share?
I think that what's amazing for me right now is just being curious. I
Yeah.
think I think that's where the magic lies, is letting go of the judgment and the right and the wrong. And there's so many different ways to heal. And I just love being in this space of being a student and being curious and learning, about new ways and not having to know the right way. Because I'm not even sure there is a right way because we're all uniquely different, right?
Right. I would agree with that. I've been in the pursuit of truth with a capital T forever, and I'm not sure that we're ever that's not a destination. I've figured out that much, that there's no place to get, and I what I've definitely figured out is there's no one way to get anywhere really, but with health, we're all what I have found, and I think you would agree with this, is that what you're really looking for is what your body needs in terms of frequency right now in this season of your life, including the season outside, but also the season of your life, because that shifts. And what you need is what's nourishing you on a frequency level, which could be different foods at different times, different practices at different times.
Absolutely. Well, you're different every day. And the
Right.
goal, like this is one of the things actually with the whole thing with my ex-husband, was that I've realized I'm like, I don't want to be the same person tomorrow that I am today. We're
Mhm.
changing that's the goal, the whole point of this lifetime. And that's one thing that comes from spending a lot of time around death, is that we are here to evolve. And I want to be different. And so you're absolutely right that we're nourishing ourselves with what fits and matches our frequency in this moment. And this is all we have, is the now, right?
Yeah, right.
And so bringing it back to that place of
Mhm.
living in the now and letting things be okay, because what's good for you today may not be good for you next week, but that's okay, right? And then with each different person. So absolutely, I 100% agree.
Yeah, and I love that you were taught in hospice first, that you would to make your way to medicine, because it wouldn't have turned I mean, how beautiful it's turned out now, and the
Yeah.
journey.
Well, and I think that's one thing too. And for a lot of people who are having awakenings, we're in a time period where a lot of people are waking up. And at first I was like, wait, why did I ever become a doctor? Like, why did I do that? Because I'm like, that is not what I want to do. And it's funny because now I have a medical license because I've given up my board certification because I just don't believe in the way that radiation is being taught. But like my medical license, I don't have to use it for anything that I do because I'm not diagnosing and I'm not prescribing pharmaceuticals or radiation or chemotherapy. And the funny thing is I'm like, everything that I want to do for healing actually is outside of my license, which is so funny, right? So for a long time, I kind of beat myself up, like, why did I do this? But now I realize, no, 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 it's valuable that so many of us have been in this system, understand it so well, and are now stepping out, because then it's different than if I had never been in this system. I have a very deep understanding of how it works, why they do the things, what are the incentives, and I can use all of that to help people in a way that I couldn't have if I didn't have that expertise.
Absolutely. I'm right in the same place, same boat, where you're like, but I went through it, but I think you couldn't have known that there was a label to read from the inside if you hadn't been in there and known that you can't read it from the inside.
Right,
Like,
and I could read the inside label, there's a label inside too,
true.
right? So I know how to read that one, and I can now read the outside one. So I think there's value
Value.
in
Mhm.
both of it, and both of those
Exactly.
perspectives. And also it gives me a lot of compassion for
Yeah.
doctors, because I think one of the things that I've seen is there's a lot of hate towards conventional medicine and
Mm.
traditional doctors and people who are outside of that space. And I have a lot of compassion for them, because I know that most of them went into it because they really wanted to help people, and they've been conditioned to think in a certain way that is really hard to break out of.
Right.
So I think having that experience also gives us compassion as we
Mhm.
help, you know, serve in new ways and
Right.
bring other people along.
Right. Absolutely. And I too, I think, the way that we are trained in all these different fields is now shifting, but you can't blame people for they followed the training, they're doing what they're trained to do. And especially in medicine, you have what, 15 minutes maybe with patients, and I know that because of who you are, I can tell that you've done great work your whole career. So, it's not you just have a different perspective now and are shifting the way that you're helping, but it's not like you weren't helping people before because I can tell that you absolutely were and still are. So,
Yeah. Well, we heal with frequency.
we
So even when,
it's all
but my
frequency.
frequency has shifted, you know what I'm saying? So now I'm
Yes.
able to offer more, but
Yes.
absolutely, I knew before what I did in that exam room with patients was far more important than what I did with the linear accelerator and the radiation.
Yeah.
And so absolutely, the doctors, even if they're only, they're prescribing medications,
Yeah.
if they have a level of consciousness and caring, that's healing, So,
Exactly. Exactly. And you should
yeah.
Katie, when I was talking about frequency matching to my graduate students, everyone thought I was insane. I was like, the reason that we do our own healing is so that you're a match for more people that need that kind of frequency healing. And they just thought that was insane. But it's true that you can only take somebody on a journey into their own healing as far as you've been on your own
Yeah.
healing. So,
Yeah.
and it's a
Well, and yeah, my
continuing.
mentor
Yeah,
always says, he says, I can't give you 50 cents if I don't have a dollar first,
right. There you
And so that's
Mhm.
definitely true in the healing space, is that we have to, and also we can't give the whole dollar.
No, right.
We have to keep filling ourselves up so that
Yeah.
we stay full and only give part of what we have so that we don't deplete ourselves. And that's what, a lot of these fields, especially within the healing fields, like traditional, medicine and that kind of thing, is that they have us depleting ourselves, which is the opposite of what we need to be doing. But
Right.
yeah, it's frequency. I think now people are starting to understand it more, but it
Mhm.
is funny sometimes when I talk about that, the other doctors are like,
Oh, yeah,
whatever,
rolling the
but it's
eyes, I
okay. I'm
know.
like, that's fine. I don't care.
Right, no, don't care. I didn't care then, don't care now. So,
Yeah.
yeah, well, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you, a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time to come on here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.